Today I want to tell you a story that I like to call David and Goliath, the sequel. Now, most of you probably know the original David and Goliath story, but just in case you don't, I'll give you a quick recap. David, the shepherd boy in Israel, was anointed at a young age to be king. He was probably 12 or 14 years old when he was anointed to be the next king of Israel. He ended up a few years later, when Goliath took on the country, he ended up winning that battle that most of you have heard about. He didn't compete with armor or a sword and spear or shield. He used some stones and a sling and ultimately took Goliath out when a rock hit him between the eyes. That, of course, brought a whole lot of fame and recognition to David. And so as a young man, he was promoted to a position in the palace working for the king. Everything went well for a few years, but ultimately the king became jealous and finally tried to kill David himself. So David took that as a cue that he better get out of Dodge and ran for his life. He ended up living in some caves, and this is the part of the story most people don't know. So here's the rest of the story, and I want you to hold it with an open mind. You might not believe in the veracity or the truth of the Bible, but I believe it is. But beyond that, there's some interesting morals and lessons that can be learned, and I want you to hear this lesson. David was basically a fugitive. The king was hunting him like a dog for years and years, and so David lived in caves, and as you can imagine, if you've ever been in a cave, they're pretty cold, wet, damp, or dark, things like that, and not an ideal place to live. But David found himself living in caves, running for his life, and somewhere along the way he started to attract a band of men to him and other people. Later, those men would, along with David, be known as the mighty men, but at the time they were basically just discontented, in debt, and distressed. That was the lot of them. But over time, about 300 men drawn to David. And where the story really gets interesting to me is there was a turn of events. David, had been anointed king and essentially told that he would be one day king, but nothing was coming to pass like he had imagined or hoped. He, in fact, probably had a worse life for having that. It felt like a target on his back, and now he was being hunted like a dog. He and his men were off one day. I don't know where they were, but when they came home, him and a few of these 100 men came back. Of course, by this time, this group had grown to quite a number. And when they came back to their homes, wherever they were hiding out in the mountains, they weren't living in caves, I guess, at that time, but they found that all their homes had been burned to the ground, their wives and children had been stolen, and all their other possessions. And the story is written, and it says that David and his men wept until they could weep no more. And then it got worse. It went from bad to worse, as things in life many times do. And David's men talked of stoning him. Now, things are bad when your best friends are trying to kill you, and things have gone from bad to worse. So there's this pivotal point in the story where it says that David encouraged himself in the Lord, and then a moment later it says that the men and him went off. He must have persuaded them, but they ran after the bad guys that had done all this, and they ran and ran for 3 days. They ran so hard and so fast and so long that 100 of them could not continue to run, and so they ended up being left behind at a river. The other men ran on, found the enemy, did battle, won back their women and children and their vital possessions. And what is so beautiful to me about that story is in that moment that it says that David, only a short few verses later in this story, was anointed king. And what I discovered in this story was that your biggest problem is your greatest opportunity. When you think things have gone as bad as they can, the truth is they sometimes will get worse. But in that low place, if you can transform the circumstances, and if you can look at them in a new light, if you can become the person and rise to the occasion to be the person that you need to be in that moment, you will see your life completely transform. And I love this story. Whether or not you want to believe it's true or not, I think that story of David and Goliath, the sequel, is that David, after he'd won and he'd had success in one arena and then lost it all, but he came back and he turned the lowest point, the lowest day in his life, into the bridge that became his best. And ultimately, what was the lowest point in his life became the launching point. And I don't know what you're facing. I don't know what situations you're dealing with, financial, health-related, or relationships. You might be on the brink of a divorce. You might be looking at bankruptcy. You might just be looking at having lost your job or some other really tough situation. And maybe you're the only one that knows it. You've kept it to yourself. But I want to encourage you today to begin to look at that problem and believe that there could be something great in it. And the thing that I have learned to do is to ask myself, how could this be the best thing that happened to me? What can I do today so that I could look back on this and be so grateful for this experience in my life? When we had our fire, that was how my husband and I encouraged each other. We stood looking at most everything we own burning to the ground 5 years ago. It was 3 days before Christmas. And we encouraged each other, saying, no matter what happens here, we are going to look back on this day and say this was one of the best things that happened to us. We wouldn't wish it on anyone else, but we are going to make this become one of the best things that happened to us. And we have used that situation to transform our lives. I encourage you today, whatever you're doing, to find the gold in your situation.